March the 31st, 1972. In a small village in northern Italy, an anonymous caller alerts police to an abandoned car. When they open the door, the vehicle explodes and 3 policemen are killed. After the attack, another anonymous phone call blames an extreme left-wing group called the Red Brigades. In response, the government rounds up 200 communists. This was just one incident in a long campaign of violence in Italy. The Italian people had no choice but to trust right-wing governments and the military to protect them from left-wing terror. And this is exactly what NATO, and America in particular, wanted them to do, at any cost. The stream of attacks in Italy continued from 1968 to 1982. Hundreds of people were killed and thousands more injured. They became known as the Years of Lead. The Red Brigades were blamed for the 1972 car bomb, but upon reviewing the evidence, Judge Felice Casson found the explosive was really C4, which was used by NATO. It had come from a secret stash of weapons hidden beneath a cemetery near Verona. This cache was just one of many. A decade later, Judge Casson caught the culprit behind the car bomb, Vincenzo Vinciguerra. Far from being a member of the Red Brigades, he belonged to a neo-fascist organization. During his trial, Vinciguerra openly admitted that he and other right-wing extremists were protected by the secret services. Then, in 1990, Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti confirmed the existence of a secret army in Italy, called Operation Gladio. Moreover, he revealed it was part of a continental network. French President François Mitterrand was then forced to confirm its existence in his country. Then the European Parliament officially condemned the clandestine creation of manipulative and operational networks and the assumption by certain US military personnel in NATO of the right to encourage the establishment in Europe of a clandestine intelligence and operation network. These underground armies were inspired by the resistance fighters of World War II, who were invaluable in defeating Nazi occupations. When NATO was formed in 1949, it recruited soldiers and brought in weapons to almost every European country. The agents were trained by Britain's Secret Intelligence Service and supplied by America's Office of Strategic Services. Today, these are known as MI6 and the CIA. The secret armies were created so that if the Soviet Union invaded and defeated Europe's armies, there would still be warriors to stay behind and help drive the Soviets out. In France, the secret army were involved in trying to kill President Charles de Gaulle because he wanted to grant independence to Algeria. In Turkey, the secret soldiers were involved in 3 military coups and was heavily involved in the Turkish mafia and drug smuggling. In Germany, the neo-Nazis behind a nail bomb in Munich were likely protected by conservative politicians. Indeed, right-wing politicians and intelligence services were a crucial part of the strategy. In 2000, the Italian Senate investigated and concluded those massacres, those bombs, those military actions had been organized or promoted or supported by men inside Italian state institutions. But few politicians actually knew about the secret armies, especially left-leaning ministers. For instance, the Belgian defense minister found out about his country's stay-behind soldiers in the news. The army had kept him out of the loop because he was a socialist. A more sinister example is that of centrist former Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro. In 1978, he proposed bringing Italian communists into the government. He was then kidnapped and killed. Again, the left-wing Red Brigades were responsible, but investigations suggest the criminals were controlled by right-wing Freemasons who worked with and were partly funded by the CIA. Not all of the stay-behind armies started campaigns of terror. There were no attacks in Norway, Switzerland, or Austria, for example. The explanation for this may lie in the interests of the USA. A memo by military diplomat Count Edgardo Sonio reveals that in 1974 he visited the CIA station chief in Rome to inform him of plans for an anti-communist coup. The CIA chief responded, "The United States supports any initiative tending to keep the communists out of government." In 2001, General Giannadelio Maletti, former head of the Italian counterintelligence unit, said the CIA, following the directives of its government, wanted to create an Italian nationalism capable of halting what it saw as a slide to the left. He then suggested President Richard Nixon used right-wing terrorism to fight communism. In the 1990s, several Operation Gladio operatives and government officials revealed that left-wing extremist groups were deeply infiltrated by American and Israeli spies, and that the CIA provided funding and sat in on secret meetings. As the Italian Senate revealed, Operation Gladio was organized by men linked to the structures of the United States intelligence. Dr. Genser says it may be no coincidence that this strategy of tension began when General Lyman Lemnitzer was Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Before running NATO, he was President Kennedy's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was he who approved Operation Northwoods, a 1962 plot to carry out false flag terror attacks in America and blame them on Fidel Castro in order to justify invading communist Cuba. Countries like Italy and West Germany had particularly strong socialist and communist factions in government. Could it be that Lemnitzer simply carried his plan to defeat communism near America into Europe and used NATO's existing paramilitary network to do it? NATO, the CIA, and MI6 refused to comment on the secret armies. They have barely admitted they ever existed. Researcher and whistleblower Sibel Edmonds says there is a new operation, designated Gladio B by the FBI. According to her, US intelligence is cooperating with and using Islamist terror groups to destabilize former Soviet countries and the Middle East in order to gain control of natural resources. NATO's secret armies were real, and though their official era is over, their methods may still be active.
Look, I think everything with a trade deal is on the table. When you're dealing in trade, everything's on the table. So NHS or anything else, or a lot more than that. But everything will be on the table, absolutely.
Donald Trump himself said everything is on the table, including our National Health Service.
Jeremy Corbyn was on daytime TV making the most of what his team sees as a propaganda gift.
He's in the Alpine Lodge.
Very comfortable in our Alpine Lodge by the fire there.
Back at the US ambassador's residence, the president seemed to be suffering another memory loss.
Mr. President, do you have a comment on Prince Andrew stepping down from his royal duties?
No, I don't know Prince Andrew, but it's a tough story. It's a very tough story. I don't know him. No.
In fact, he's seen him quite a few times over the years, most recently this summer. He's even boasted about playing a round of golf with Prince Andrew. Turkey's President Erdogan was amongst the NATO leaders holding talks at number 10. Turkey's closeness to Russia, one of many tensions at this NATO summit. President Trump taunted President Macron. Would he take back ISIS fighters originally from France, who US troops were now guarding in Syria?
They're mostly from Europe, and some of the countries are agreeing. I have not spoken to the president about that. Would you like some nice ISIS fighters?
Look, if you look at the situation,
You can take everyone you want.
let's be serious. The very large number of fighters you have on the ground are ISIS fighters coming from Syria, from Iraq, and the region. Your number one problem are not the foreign fighters. This is the ISIS fighters in the region. And you have more and more of these fighters due to the situation today.
This is why he's a great politician, because that was one of the greatest non-answers I've ever heard. And that's okay.
As they readied Buckingham Palace for the NATO reception, President Trump was taking on another NATO ally. Was Canada coughing up the 2% of GDP on defence spending that NATO sets as a guideline?
We'll put Canada on a payment plan, right? I'm sure the Prime Minister would love that. What are you at? What is your number?
The number we talk about is 70% increase over these past years.
Okay. Where are you now in terms of your number?
We're at 135?
1.3.
1.4. And continuing to move
They're
forward.
getting there.
The US President's convoy making its way to Buckingham Palace this evening. All leaders were greeted by palace staff at the door. But this US Secret Serviceman suggested he should take over for the President's armour-plated limo. It's NATO's 70th anniversary gathering, but there's no air of celebration. President Macron described NATO last month as brain dead. President Trump today dismissed that as insulting, but he himself has called NATO obsolete.
Who gave coalition forces in Libya the right to eliminate Gaddafi? Well, that's the question Vladimir Putin's been asking during an official visit to Denmark. The Russian premier also said NATO has effectively joined one of the warring sides in the conflict, and more responsible action should be taken instead. RT's Daniel Bushell joins us now live for this in Brussels. Daniel, so the Russian Prime Minister has effectively lashed out on the operation there in Libya.
Yes, he's made the speech in Denmark and he was very angry. He says that Gaddafi is not the best person in the world. Sure, he's made many mistakes, done many bad things, but that does not give the coalition the right to bomb indiscriminately. His words were that they are bombing Gaddafi's palaces in Tripoli every night. Now, a coalition said that their plan was not to get rid of Gaddafi. So his question was, Mr. Putin's question was, why are the coalition forces obviously making this effort to go after Colonel Gaddafi himself? itself. Now, we also heard that the experts here in Brussels have confirmed that there is bombing going on by the coalition forces, which is not being covered by the media here in the European Union. Mr. Putin added that oil was a key interest for the Western powers, for the European powers who have gone into Libya, that they want to get rid of Gaddafi and install people who are more favourable to the European Union so that European companies can control the oil reserves. Let's have a listen to exactly what Mr. Putin had to say.
The coalition said destroying Gaddafi was not their goal. Then why bomb his palaces? Now some officials have claimed that eliminating him was in fact their goal. Who gave them that right? Did he have a fair trial? Returning to the no-fly zone, the bombings are destroying the country's entire infrastructure. When the so-called civilized world uses all its military power against a small country destroying what's been created by generations, I don't know if that's good.
Mr. Putin said that they have to give the Libyan people time to sort out their own problems, and there's really double standards here, he added. There are several other parts of the region in the Middle East and North Africa which is facing pretty much civil war situations, but which the West is either ignoring or not really paying the same amount of attention to.
Well, Daniel, there have been reports about an EU plan to send army convoys to assist humanitarian aid there in Libya. Of course, there'll be those who say, well, this is really the start of a military ground operation, something, of course, that allies were adamant wouldn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard these rumours for the first time a few weeks ago that the EU plans to send up to 1,000 troops under the guise of so-called humanitarian aid. Russia fears that this will be used to plan an invasion and to carry out an invasion of Libya on the pretext of supporting humanitarian aid to the Libyan people. The draft plan is called U4Libya. It's supported by the 27 member states of the European Union, prepared by them, and it provides for ground troops, in fact, to be deployed by the Western coalition. In the port city of Misrata, which is currently under siege by forces loyal to Muammar Gaddafi. Here in Brussels, Michael Mann, the chief spokesman to the European Union High Representative Catherine Ashton, said that they would only send up to 1,000 troops, and the troops would only be used if they came under attack. Otherwise, they would only defend aid. Now, Russia has said that it will only support another UN resolution if it explicitly says that it will not continue the violence, that if it ends the violence and starts negotiations, then that is the only condition under which they would support that. Now, I've been speaking to military analysts here in Brussels, and they confirm that ground troops are already in operation in Libya. This is not being covered by the media in the European Union, but troops are already in operation, and they are pushing forward in Libya with Colonel Gaddafi as the target.
Daniel, thanks very much indeed for that. That's Daniel Bushell live there in Brussels.
Italian media reports say a former Portuguese security official was arrested in Rome following a request from Portugal. Federico Carvalho Gil was detained along with an unnamed Russian citizen. Gil is a former division chief in Portugal's secret intelligence service. He was detained by Italian police after a sting operation coordinated with Portuguese agents. Gil was allegedly in possession of secret documents regarding NATO and the EU. The second man is said to have been arrested with a large amount of cash. The Portuguese is charged with espionage and illegal transfer of confidential information to third parties. The case is apparently a very sensitive one for NATO because Gil has access to a wide array of NATO secrets.
So when you listen to the politics in the United States, you're told that the biggest threat the U.S. faces comes from ISIL and ISIS, this Middle Eastern group now that's come on the scene in the last few years with some 40, 50,000 men. They threaten the USA. I mean, the U.S. is going to have to spend billions of dollars on weapons to protect itself. But there's other people that will tell you that the biggest threat we face comes from corporations, too big to fail banks that have to be broken up, or how the mergers of pharmaceuticals, travel, whatever is threatening smaller companies around the world. Maybe it's drug cartels. Billions and billions of dollars of drugs are being sold around the world. Heroin epidemics are taking place. But I put to you that there are 4 organizations in the world that get a complete pass when it comes to looking at threats that all the people on the planet face, and one of them has to be the United Nations. It is not a United Nation. This is a country club for the richest, most powerful countries out there, predominantly run by the United States. The UN is located in the United States. It's in New York, and although there have been discussions about moving it to a more neutral place, it isn't going to happen. The U.S. donates the most money to keep this organization going because it can snap its finger and the UN reacts to whatever the U.S. wants. But understanding that Russia, China, and a few other countries also have a veto in the United Nations Security Council. The United Nations has come under the microscope a lot in the last while about failures, total failures. And even when it comes to environmental concerns or controlling large corporations, mining interests around the world, the UN is completely useless. And basically, think about all these resolutions that are passed. Well, not passed, because if one country puts in a veto, it doesn't matter if it's Russia, China, U.S. How many resolutions have been brought on Israel that the United States vetoes, along with Canada, or resolutions against China, or resolutions against Russia? It's all just a show. It's just a simple show, but it's a damn expensive one. And again, people are not questioning it. Just like they don't question the validity of the International Monetary Fund and why so many third world countries have been indebted by it, forcing them to sell whatever resources they have, and how so many of the indigenous people around the world feel betrayed by their country, their governments, and the IMF. They want the IMF to get the hell out of there, but the IMF has done a very good job in entrenching itself in these economies. Now, you have the BRIC countries creating their own version of IMF, World Bank, and it's going to be a race to the bottom for many of the indigenous people, countries that have special resources like the rare earth minerals and stuff like that. This is like the worst case of organized crime you could think of, is when the rich, wealthy countries get together and go after whatever they want using all kinds of pressure tactics. I mean, you could associate this or think about it as a modern day mafia with enforcers, with loan sharking, and if you can't pay, we're going to take whatever you have. Now, let's go to the North Atlantic terrorist... Oh, yeah, it's a terrorist organization. That's a takeoff on NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But this is another organization that has swollen in the last few decades. I mean, when Russia collapsed, the USSR, and it was supposed to be just part of Europe that was under NATO control. But since then, NATO has expanded, coming ever closer towards Russia's border, which is getting Russia all worked up. And I can understand it. I mean, would the United States like to see foreign powers moving into Mexico or Canada and pushing their ideology or whatever, putting weapons, ballistic missiles and all that stuff in there? Hell no, it wouldn't happen. So NATO should have been disbanded, done away with a long time ago, and peace be the most important factor for Europe, Russia, and North America, but not the case. And we're on to the World Bank, another one of the International Monetary Fund spawned entities that is described by Forbes in 2012 as being out of control, full of corruption and dysfunction. Wow. Do you hear about that much on the news? I mean, I know that people out there who do like to keep informed are aware of what's happening. It doesn't matter if you talk about NATO, IMF, World Bank, any of these organizations, but the general public doesn't see it because they're tuned into normal television news and get no real information about what is really happening. The inmates are running the asylum, says a former director. Did you know that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are institutions in the United Nations system? So there is a strong family connection. All of these things are brought together under an umbrella. And who controls that umbrella? Well, of course, it's got to be the biggest, baddest player in the neighborhood. It's kind of like a gang, and the gang has a leader. Critics of the World Bank and the IMF are concerned about the conditionalities imposed on borrower countries. The World Bank and the IMF often attach loan conditionalities based on what is termed the Washington Consensus. Washington, oh, I've heard that name before. Focusing on liberalization of trade, investment, and financial sector, deregulation and privatization of nationalized industries. So if you have a nationalized industry, you are bad. You can't do that. You know, you can't have the oil or water or whatever belong to all the people. It's going to belong to whoever brings in the money. It's got to be put up for sale. We've seen this happening with the EU and how their European Union Central Bank is making Greece sell off some of their national treasures. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable that countries are brought to their knees by neoliberal, neoconservative, whatever the hell neo you want to think of, organizations. So I put to you that these four organizations, the United Nations, the NATO, IMF, and World Bank, are as evil as any of the other organizations they talk about. The only thing is that they are our evil organizations. So we're not going to name them. We're not going to come after them. We're going to use them to chart a new reality, a new world order. At least that's the way I see it.
On April 4, 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty was signed between France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Norway, Denmark, Italy, Portugal, Iceland, Canada, and the United States. The pact was designed to keep within the letter and spirit of the United Nations Charter. The treaty members realized that real peace is more than an absence of war, and they seek to promote political and economic stability in the North Atlantic area. To ensure this, they are sworn to stand together against aggression. An attack against one would be an attack against all. This union of 12 nations became known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or more simply, NATO.